Well, here at last, dear friends, on the shores of the sea, comes the end of our fellowship in Middle-earth. Go in peace. I will not say do not weep, for not all tears are an evil.
Greetings and well met, my friends. Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today, I want to continue and slightly modify a series that I started last year, with what happened to the hobbits after The Lord of the Rings. In this series called Epilogues, we will discuss what happened to characters after the chief stories that included them. Today, we will be talking about what happened to each member of the Fellowship of the Ring preceding the events of The Lord of the Rings. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. First, I must give an honorable mention to the High Warden of the White Tower, Boromir, son of Denethor II. As we all know, he met his end defending the hobbits Merry and Pippin from Saruman's Uruk-hai during the Fellowship of the Ring, and he was slain by a multitude of arrows as he repented for his deeds against the ring-bearer Frodo Baggins. He passed with honor, and the three hunters gathered his possessions before sending them, with their master, on a boat from Lothlorien out into Nen Hithawil and the Anduin River. Boromir's brother Faramir saw Boromir's funeral boat pass upon the Anduin, and the shattered pieces of his horn were found by Gondorian soldiers upon the banks of the river. Boromir passed away on February 26th of 3019 of the Third Age, at the age of 41. Now, on to the other members of the Fellowship. After the scurrying of the Shire, Frodo would briefly serve as deputy mayor of the Shire to help rebuild the land of the hobbits, until his wounds from the quest of the ring prevented him from doing so. Frodo tried to live as peacefully as possible during the remainder of his days in Middle-earth, writing his account in the Red Book of Westmarch, but on the anniversary of the stabbing by the Witch King near Weathertop, the pain from his shoulder wound would flare once again, and on each anniversary of his stabbing by Shelob, Frodo would feel sick again. His pain became too great and continuous for Frodo to enjoy a normal life. So, on September 29th of 3021 of the Third Age, Frodo joined Bilbo, Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel, and Círdan upon an elven ship, to live out the rest of his days in Valinor and recover from his wounds, as his time as a ring-bearer earned him that place and that honor in the land of the Valar. He was 53 when he was last seen in Middle-earth. As for Gandalf, his errand given to him by the Valar was completed, and Sauron was defeated. Following Aragorn's coronation, Gandalf would say farewell to many of his friends, before going to spend time with the Moss-gatherer Tom Bombadil, and likely his wife Goldberry as well. Gandalf would relay much of his adventures to Tom, but Bombadil was most interested in the Ents. Besides this, we don't know what Gandalf did before sailing west, but eventually, as mentioned before, Gandalf would join the others and sail west. However, I subscribe to the theory that they also had another passenger on the elven ship as well, Shadowfax, as Gandalf's friend does not have a conclusive ending to his story. Thus, the wizard Gandalf, or the Maya Olorin, returned home with his friends. I do wonder if Gandalf retained his elderly appearance when he returned to Valinor, or if he took on a younger-looking form while among his friends from Middle-earth. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Next, we look at Samwise the Brave, who replanted the Shire with the soil of Lady Galadriel after the scurrying of the Shire. Sam would also plant a silver nut where the party tree had been, and from it would come the only Malorn tree west of the Misty Mountains and east of the Sundering Seas. Sam would also marry Rosie Cotton, and move in with Frodo at Bag End, before his friend sailed west and left the home and the Red Book of Westmarch to him. Sam and Rosie would have 13 kids who would take the name of Gardner, in honor of their father who brought back much nature into the Shire. Will Whitfoot resigned as mayor of Mickle Delving, and Gamgee would go on to serve as mayor for 7 consecutive 7-year terms, leading the Shire into a better future. Sam would add his narratives concerning the War of the Ring to the Red Book of Westmarch during his long and happy life. He would also be made a Councillor of the North Kingdom by King Elessar. Soon afterwards, he was also given the Star of the Dunedain, and his daughter Eleanor would be a maid of honor to Queen Arwen. Eventually, Rosie would pass away in the year 61 of the Fourth Age, and Samwise would entrust the Red Book of Westmarch to his eldest daughter Eleanor, to be handed down as an heirloom. After this, Sam went to the Grey Havens and sailed west, as he too was a ring-bearer, and he would live out the rest of his days with his best friend Frodo in the land of the Valar. Sam was 102 when he was last seen in Middle-earth. Now let's look at Legolas and Gimli, who would be the last members of the Fellowship to journey into the West. After the coronation of Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli would journey northwards with many of their friends, coming into Rohan, where the elf would fulfill his promise to the dwarf to walk in the glittering caves of Aglarond. Afterwards, the company would ride towards Isengard and the Fangorn Forest, and Gimli would fulfill his promise to Legolas, and they would walk through the forest together. After their journey in the Land of the Ents, the two would travel northeast and go back to their respective homes of Mirkwood and Erebor. Eventually, Gimli would return to the caves of Aglarond with many dwarves, and there establish a new kingdom for the sons of Durin, and he would become the lord of the Glittering Caves. Gimli would also lead the rebuilding of the gates of Minas Tirith with mithril and steel for King Elisar, and he would achieve works that only a dwarf could. One such work would be the heirloom of his house, the 3 hairs of Lady Galadriel, encased in crystal that would be a sign of goodwill between the dwarves and elves for all time. Gimli would eventually encounter Pippin and Merry once more, and ensure that the history of the Sons of Durin made it into the Thane's Book, a copy of the Red Book of Westmarch. Legolas, on the other hand, would return from Mirkwood to Gondor with a company of elves to restore the lands of Ithilien, and it is there that he would live with much of his kin until the death of King Elisar. After the passing of Aragorn in 120 of the Fourth Age, Legolas would build a boat in Ithilien, and invite a now elderly Gimli into the West. Gimli accepted his best friend's invitation, and he became the only dwarf to sail west. In Valinor, Gimli would reunite with many of his old friends, including Galadriel. Whether or not they ever met with Frodo and Sam again is unknown, but I would doubt it, as it is likely that the 2 hobbits had already passed away by this point. When they sailed west, Gimli was 262 years old, and Legolas was at least a few thousand years old, as we don't know his specific birth date. Now we come to the hobbits Merry and Pippin. The two were commanders of the hobbits during the Scurrying of the Shire, and their names were placed at the top of the roll, which was a list of names of the hobbits that fought in the battles. Merry and Pippin were heroes, openly wearing their armors of Rohan and Gondor respectively, and their height from the Entdrots made them even more lordly. Their heights were at least 4'5", which was taller than Bolroer Took. Pippin would go on to marry Diamond of Longcleave, and they would have at least one son named Faramir. Merry, now known as Meriadoc the Magnificent, would wed Fredegar Bolger's sister Estella, and have at least one unnamed son. Merry would become the Master of Buckland, and Pippin would become the Thane of the Shire. Pippin and Merry were also made counselors of the North Kingdom by King Elisar, and met with Aragorn and Sam on the Brandywine Bridge soon after. Aragorn would gift the lands of the Westmarch, from the White Downs to the Tower Hills to the Hobbits, and so the boundaries of the Shire were expanded. At the request of Sam, Pippin made Sam's son-in-law, Fastred, who was the husband of Elenor, the Warden of Westmarch, so he could protect the new western lands. Pippin and Merry would also make many scholarly contributions as well, as Pippin would gather much information concerning Númenor and the sons of Elendil at the Great Smiles, and he would put together the Tale of Years. Merry, on the other hand, would also be the author of many works such as The Herblore of the Shire, The Reckoning of Years, and Old Words and Names in the Shire. Eventually, in the year 63 of the Fourth Age, Merry and Pippin would resign from their offices, leaving them to their children, and visit Rohan and Gondor at the request of King Éomer. Pippin would also bring the Thane's Book with him, which was the copy of the Red Book of Westmarch, at the behest of King Elisar. And so they would journey southwards, visiting the 2 kingdoms over the next few years until they passed away, and were laid to rest in Rath Dinin. Pippin was over 65 years old, and Merry was over 103 years old when they passed away. Finally, we come to the last, but one of the greatest members of the Fellowship. After being crowned as King Elisar, Aragorn would find a new white tree to replace the dead one. He would marry Arwen, take up the scepter of Annúminas, signifying the kingship of Arnor, and he would ride with his friends northwards to Isengard to bid them farewell. After receiving the keys to Orthanc and leaving his friends with the last sight of the Elisar Stone, Aragorn would begin the reordering of the reunited kingdom. First, he saw Orthanc and Isengard restored, with the Orthanc Stone being returned there. During this time, Aragorn would uncover many secrets and treasures within Orthanc, such as the Elendil Mirror that Saruman had taken from Isildur's body. The Elendil Mirror was also known as the Star of Elendil, and it was 2 star-shaped white gems set atop mithril fillets. He would wear this heirloom on his brow on days of importance, while on other days he would wear the second Elendil mirror that had been passed down to him originally. Aragorn and Arwen would eventually have a son named Eldarion. King Elisar would go on to make Steward Faramir, the Lord of Emin Arnin, and the Prince of Ithilien. Aragorn would also re-establish the Great Council of Gondor, whose chief counselor was the Steward, and he would also renew the Oath of Cirion with Éomer, re-establishing strong ties with the Kingdom of Rohan. With his kingly powers, Aragorn would declare that the Durodain Forest belonged to the Durodain people, and it was to be protected by his kingdom. Similarly, Aragorn would proclaim that men were unable to enter the Shire, as it was a free and autonomous land under the protection of his kingdom. Years later, Aragorn would give the Shire the land of Westmarch as well. As mentioned before, he would meet with the hobbits Sam, Merry, and Pippin, and make them counselors of the North. His reign was truly a great one, marked by the re-establishment of alliances between all of the free peoples, and the victories over the Easterlings and Haradrim, who would do further harm to the good peoples of the world. His efforts would greatly rebuild Arnor, which had been previously devastated in the war with Angmar many centuries before, and he would visit Anúminas, Arnor's ancient capital. Many years later into the Fourth Age, King Elisar would request the Thane's book from Pippin, so that Gondorian scribes could add accounts to it and make copies. So the 2 hobbits came south and lived out the remaining years there. After many great years of life, where much change was made, Aragorn gave up his life, as did the Númenórean kings of old, and he passed his titles and heirlooms onto his son Eldarion. Before his passing, he even wished that Arwen would sail west, but she refused, as the choice was long gone. King Elisar would pass on his birthday, March 1st, in the year 120 of the Fourth Age, when he was 210 years old. He was laid to rest alongside his friends Merry and Pippin until the end of days. And so ends the last history of the final member of the Fellowship. From the Epilogues of the Fellowship of the Ring, we see that friendships must never break as the days of our lives pass. We remember too that it is never too late to continue aiding the world and doing what's right. Thank you all so much for watching and sticking with me as we looked at so much information. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. If you'd like to learn more about the events described, please check out the appendices and the Return of the King, specifically Appendix B. Also, let me know your thoughts on the later histories of these characters in the comments below. If you'd like to contact me more directly, please be sure to join us on Facebook and Twitter, and if you'd like to help the channel grow and get access to our podcast, please consider donating to our Patreon. Links for those are in the description. Don't forget to subscribe to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I will see you all again next week with a video about the Light of Eärendil. As always, thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.